65 million years ago, a ship moved through the dark between stars. It was a Thyran vessel, long and silver, built in the days when the Thyran Collective ruled 1,000 systems, and their name was spoken with respect across the galaxy. The ship was called the Vithari, and its captain was a woman named Ilara Sen. She had served the Collective for 40 years and had seen more worlds than most beings could dream of. On that particular day, she was not looking for anything special. The Vithari was on a routine survey mission, cataloging young solar systems at the edge of explored space. It was boring work. Important, but boring. Then the sensors found something. "Captain," her science officer said, his voice sharp with surprise. "Third planet from the local star. It is full of life." Ilara looked at the readings and felt her breath catch. The planet was beautiful: blue oceans, green landmasses, thick atmosphere, millions of species. Giant creatures walked its surface. Tiny ones filled its seas. The world was bursting with existence. But there was a problem. A massive asteroid nearly 10 kilometers wide was on a direct path toward the planet. It would hit within weeks. When it did, the impact would be catastrophic. Fires would cover the continents. Dust would block the sun for years. Almost everything on the surface would die. "There will be nothing left," the science officer whispered. Ilara stared at the blue world on her screen. She thought about the millions of creatures living there, eating, breathing, raising their young, completely unaware that death was falling toward them from the sky. Protocol was clear. The Thyran Collective had strict rules about interfering with primitive worlds. You observed, you recorded, you did not touch. Ilara closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she gave the order. "Activate the gravity drives. Target the asteroid." Her crew looked at her with wide eyes. Her first officer stepped forward. "Captain, protocol says." "I know what protocol says," Ilara replied quietly. "Do it anyway." The Vithari moved into position. Its gravity manipulation technology, the pride of Thyran engineering, locked onto the asteroid and pushed. Not enough to stop it completely. The ship was not powerful enough for that, but enough to change its angle by a fraction of a degree, enough to reduce a total extinction into a survivable disaster. The asteroid still hit. The giant creatures still died, but deep underground in burrows and caves, small furry mammals survived. They came out into a changed world, and over millions of years they grew. They changed. They became something new. They became humans. Ilara Sen never knew this. When she returned to Thyran space, she was court-martialed for breaking protocol. Her rank was taken. Her name was removed from the honors list. The record of what she did was buried in the deepest archive, marked as a minor incident and forgotten. She died in obscurity, believing her choice had not mattered. She was wrong. 65 million years later, Elder Valeth sat in the great chamber of the Galactic Council and tried not to fall asleep. He was old, very old even by Thyran standards. His skin, once a deep blue, had faded to pale gray. His hands trembled when he lifted them. He was the senior representative of the Thyran Collective, which sounded impressive until you understood what the Thyran Collective had become. They were nothing now. One star system, a handful of aging ships, a homeworld called Ithara whose sun was slowly expanding, growing hotter every year, cooking the planet alive. In maybe 40 years, Ithara would be uninhabitable. 800 million Thyrans remained, the last of a civilization that once ruled the galaxy. The other council members treated Valeth with politeness. The kind of politeness you show to a dying relative, gentle, sad, and ultimately empty. Today, the council was discussing a new matter. A young species from an unremarkable star system had petitioned for full membership. They called themselves humans, and they came from a world called Earth. Valeth had heard of them. Everyone had. Humans had burst onto the galactic scene barely 2 centuries ago, and they had spread with a speed that made older species nervous. They were loud. They were stubborn. They built things too fast and asked questions too slowly. They made friends with everyone and enemies with anyone who tried to stop them. Counselor Dreth of the Voron hegemony was speaking against their admission. "They are reckless," he said, his deep voice filling the chamber. "They expand without caution. They form alliances without strategy. They are children playing in a house built by their betters." Several council members murmured in agreement. Valith listened quietly. He had been given the humans' file to review before the vote, and something in it had caught his attention. The origin coordinates of their homeworld. The numbers were familiar, like a song he had heard long ago but could not quite remember. While Dreth continued his speech, Valith opened his personal terminal and searched the oldest Thyran archives. It took a long time. The records were ancient, fragmented, stored in formats that modern systems could barely read. Then he found it. A survey log from 65 million years ago. The Vithari, Captain Alara Sen, a blue planet, an asteroid, a decision made against orders. Valith's hand stopped trembling. He read the entry 3 times to make sure he was not imagining it. The planet that Alara Sen had saved was Earth. Humanity existed because a Thyran captain had turned her ship. Valith sat very still for a long time. Around him the debate continued. Voices rose and fell. Arguments were made for and against. The vote was going to be close. When his name was called, Valith stood slowly. Every joint in his body ached. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. The Thyran vote did not carry much weight anymore, but in a close decision, it mattered. "I vote in favor," he said simply. And that was enough. The motion passed by a single vote. Humanity was admitted to the Galactic Council. Afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, the human representative approached him. She was a tall woman in a dark uniform, with sharp eyes and steady hands. Her name was Admiral Rena Vasquez. "Elder Valith," she said, extending her hand in the human custom. "Thank you for your vote. It means a great deal to us." Valith took her hand. Her grip was warm and strong. His was cold and fragile. "You are welcome, Admiral," he said. She looked at him closely. "Can I ask why you voted for us? Most of the elder races seem to think we are too young." Valith thought about a captain who turned her ship 65 million years ago. He thought about the small, furry creatures hiding in their burrows while the sky burned above them. He thought about the long, impossible chain of events that had led from that moment to this one, to this woman standing before him, strong and alive and full of fire. "Because I believe in giving life a chance," he said quietly. Admiral Vasquez smiled. She did not understand the weight behind his words, not yet. But she would. 3 years after humanity joined the Galactic Council, a man named Elias Morin stepped off a transport shuttle and onto the surface of Ithara for the first time. He was a xenoarchaeologist, a human who studied the history and ruins of alien civilizations. He was 34 years old, thin, with messy brown hair and the kind of face that always looked like it was thinking about something. He had been assigned to a cultural exchange program on the Thyran homeworld, and he had been excited about it for months. That excitement lasted about 10 minutes. Ithara was dying. He could feel it the moment he stepped outside. The air was hot and heavy. The sky had a yellowish tint that came from the expanding sun. The once great cities of the Thyran Collective stood half empty, their towers still beautiful but their streets quiet. There were no children playing. There were very few young people at all. 800 million Thyrans lived here, and every single one of them knew that their world had a deadline. 40 years, maybe less. After that, the heat would become too much. The oceans would begin to boil. Ithara would become a tomb. The Galactic Council had offered help, of course. They had offered the Thyrans a handful of barren moons in distant systems, cold, empty rocks with thin atmospheres and no life. The kind of places you sent people when you wanted to look generous without actually being generous. The Thyrans had accepted with quiet dignity. They had no other choice. Elias found all of this deeply unfair. He said so to anyone who would listen, which was how he met Sira Valeth. Sira was the granddaughter of Elder Valeth. She was young by Thyran standards. With deep blue skin and silver eyes that carried a sadness she tried very hard to hide. She worked as an archivist in the great library of Ithara, a massive building that held the recorded history of the Thyran collective stretching back millions of years. "You are the human who keeps complaining," she said when they first met. "I prefer the word advocating," Elias replied. She almost smiled, almost. They became friends slowly, the way people do when they are both a little lonely and a little angry at the universe. Sira showed Elias the archives. He showed her human music, which she found chaotic and strangely moving. They spent long evenings talking about history, about loss, about what it meant to belong to a civilization that was running out of time. It was during one of those evenings that they found it. Elias had been researching the early expansion period of the Thyran collective, the era when they had explored and mapped most of the galaxy. He was reading through old survey logs when he noticed a file that was sealed. Not just sealed, buried. It had been deliberately hidden, placed in an archive section that had not been accessed in millions of years. "What is this?" he asked Sira. She frowned and pulled up the file. It took her nearly an hour to break through the old security codes. When the file finally opened, they both read it in silence. It was the complete record of the Vithari incident. Captain Alara Sen, the blue planet, the asteroid, the unauthorized use of gravity drives to alter the asteroid's path, the court-martial, the burial of the record. But there was more than Valeth had seen. There was a personal log from Captain Sen herself, recorded the night before her trial. Sira translated it slowly, her voice growing quieter with each sentence. "I know what I did was against our laws. I know I will be punished for it. But I looked at that world and I saw life, so much life, trying so hard to exist. And I could not watch it end when I had the power to help. If that is a crime, then I accept the punishment. But I do not accept that it was wrong. Every living thing deserves a chance. That is what I believe. That is what I will always believe." Elias sat very still. His hands were shaking. "The coordinates," he said. "Sira, look at the coordinates of that planet." She looked, she checked them twice. Then she looked at Elias with wide eyes. "That is Earth," she whispered. "That is Earth," he confirmed. They stared at each other across a gap of species, culture, and 65 million years of history, and they both understood what this meant. Humanity existed because of Alara Sen, because one Thyran captain had broken the rules to give a dying world a chance. Without her, the asteroid would have hit at full force. The mammals would have died. The chain of evolution that led to primates, to early humans, to civilization, to space travel, all of it would have been erased before it began. The Thyrans had given humanity the gift of existence itself, and they had not even remembered doing it. Elias sent his findings to Earth that night. He marked the transmission as urgent. Then he sat on the steps of the great library and looked up at the yellow sky and cried, though he could not fully explain why. The news reached Earth like a thunderbolt. Within hours, it was on every screen, every feed, every network. The story was simple and it hit hard. The reason humanity was alive, the reason any human had ever been born, had ever loved, had ever built anything, was because an alien captain 65 million years ago had looked at Earth and decided it was worth saving. And now that captain's people were dying, and the galaxy was doing almost nothing to help them. People wept in the streets, not out of sadness but out of something deeper, a feeling that had no clean name. Gratitude and rage and determination all twisted together. Admiral Rena Vasquez contacted Elder Valith on a secure channel. Her face was calm, but her eyes were burning. "You knew," she said. "When you voted for us, you knew." Valith looked at her through the screen. He was sitting in his study on Ithara, surrounded by old books and older memories. He looked very tired. "I knew," he admitted. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because it was not done for repayment, Admiral. Captain Sen did not save your world so that one day you would owe us something. She did it because she believed it was right. That is reason enough." Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady and hard, like steel being forged. "Maybe for your people, Elder, but not for mine. Humans do not forget, and we do not leave debts unpaid." Valith studied her face through the screen. He saw something there that he had not seen in a very long time, not pity, not diplomacy, but something raw and real. A promise made with the full weight of a species behind it. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Whatever it takes," she said. That night, the United Earth Parliament convened an emergency session. Representatives from every human colony, every station, every ship attended. The session lasted 14 hours. When it was over, they had a plan. They called it Operation Hearthfire. And it would change everything. Admiral Vasquez presented Operation Hearthfire to the Galactic Council on a cold Tuesday morning, though the word cold meant nothing in a pressurized space station orbiting a neutral star. She stood at the center of the great circular chamber, surrounded by representatives of 47 species, and she laid it all out in plain language. No poetry, no politics, just the plan. Humanity would find a suitable planet in unclaimed space. They would terraform it, reshape its atmosphere, its soil, its oceans, to match the conditions the Thyrans needed to survive. They would build cities, plant forests, and engineer ecosystems. Then they would help relocate the entire Thyran civilization to their new home before Ithara became uninhabitable. The cost would be enormous. The effort would take decades. Humanity would bear the majority of the burden themselves. When Vasquez finished speaking, the chamber was silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then it exploded. Councillor Dreth of the Voron hegemony was the first to rise. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray skin and eyes like polished black stones. The Voron were the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and Dreth had spent 20 years making sure everyone remembered that. "This is madness," he said, his deep voice carrying across the chamber. "The Thyran decline is a natural process. Civilizations rise and they fall. This is the oldest truth of the galaxy. What humanity proposes is not kindness, it is arrogance. They are a species barely 2 centuries old on the galactic stage, and they believe they can reshape a world. They believe they can play gods." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the elder species. The Voron, the Selani, the Kethrin, they all nodded. Dreth continued, "And we must ask ourselves, what does humanity truly want? They claim this is gratitude, but is it? Or is this a bid for power? A revitalized Thyran collective allied with humanity would create a bloc that could challenge the existing balance of the Council. This is not charity, this is strategy." More murmurs, louder this time. Vasquez stood quietly through all of it. She did not argue, she did not raise her voice. She simply waited. When the debate was over, the council voted. The result was decisive, 31 against, 16 in favor. Operation Hearthfire was denied. Humanity was formally ordered to stand down. Vasquez nodded politely, thanked the council for their time, and left the chamber without another word. Dreth watched her go with a satisfied expression. He believed the matter was settled. He was very wrong. The news of the Council's decision reached Earth within the hour. The reaction was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen from a single species. Humans did not respond with quiet disappointment. They did not shrug and move on. They responded with a fury that was almost frightening in its unity. In every human city on every human world, people took to the streets, not in violence, in purpose. Millions of voices saying the same thing: this is not acceptable. The Thyrans saved us. We will save them. No committee of aliens who did nothing for 65 million years gets to tell us otherwise. The phrase, "we remember Ithara," appeared everywhere, on walls, on ships, on clothing, on skin. It became more than a slogan. It became an identity, a statement of who humanity was and what they believed. On the colony world of New Geneva, a retired engineer named Maria Torres donated her entire savings to a fund for Operation Hearthfire. When a reporter asked her why, she said, "Because I exist. My children exist. Every human who ever lived exists because someone on that ship decided we were worth saving. If I cannot repay that, then what am I?" She was not alone. Donations poured in from everywhere. Engineers quit their jobs to volunteer. Scientists offered their expertise for free. Ship captains offered their vessels. The response was not organized from the top down, it grew from the ground up, like a fire spreading through dry grass. Admiral Vasquez addressed the United Earth Parliament 3 days after the council vote. The chamber was packed. Every seat was filled. People stood in the aisles and watched from screens in the corridors outside. She spoke simply. "The Galactic Council has denied our request to help the Thyran people. They have told us that the death of a civilization is natural, that it is not our place to interfere." She paused. "I respect the Council. I respect its authority, but I do not respect the idea that compassion requires permission." The chamber was completely silent. 65 million years ago, a Thyran captain named Ilara Sen broke the rules of her own government to save a world she had never seen before. She was punished for it. Her name was erased. And because of what she did, every single one of us is alive today. Vasquez's voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. "The council says we cannot help. I say we must, not because it is easy, not because it is smart, but because it is right. Because if we turn away from the people who gave us everything, then we do not deserve what they gave us." She took a breath. "I am asking this parliament to authorize Operation Hearthfire to proceed, with or without the council's approval." The vote was unanimous. Every single representative voted yes. Humanity moved fast. They had already identified a candidate world, a rocky planet orbiting a stable star in unclaimed space, far from any existing territorial claims. It was not perfect. The atmosphere was thin and toxic. The surface was barren. The tectonics were unstable. But it was the right size, the right distance from its sun, and it had water locked beneath its crust. It could be made into a home. Humans were good at that. Within weeks, the first ships launched. Engineering vessels, science frigates, cargo haulers loaded with equipment and supplies. Thousands of them, streaming out of human space in a convoy that stretched across light years. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Several species had expected humans to make noise and then back down. They always expected that. They never seemed to learn. Councillor Dreth was furious. He pushed the council to condemn humanity's actions formally. He demanded sanctions. He demanded consequences. "If we allow this," he told the council, "we tell every young species that they can ignore our decisions whenever they feel strongly enough. The rules of this council will mean nothing." What he did not say, what everyone understood, was simpler. Dreth was afraid. The Voron had spent centuries building their power on the slow decline of older civilizations. Every great species that faded left a gap, and the Voron filled it. A reborn Thyran collective allied with humanity threatened that entire structure. This was not about rules, it was about power. The council passed a formal condemnation. Dreth pushed for more. He wanted a blockade, a military line to stop human ships from reaching the candidate world. Some council members hesitated, but Dreth's allies held the majority. The resolution passed. A Voron fleet was authorized to block all traffic to the candidate system. On Ithara, Sira Valith watched the news with Elias Morin at her side. Her face was pale. "They will stop you," she said quietly. "The Voron are not bluffing, they will use force." Elias looked at her. He was scared, she could see it in his eyes. But there was something else there too, something stubborn and burning and very, very human. "Maybe," he said, "but they will have to go through every single one of us first." Sira stared at him. "Why?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the word. "Why would your people risk a war for us? You barely know us. We are strangers." Elias took her hand. His skin was warm, hers was cool. "You are not strangers," he said. "You are the reason we exist, and where I come from, that makes you family." Sira did not answer. She could not, but she held his hand tightly and did not let go. Far away, in the dark between stars, human ships burned toward a barren world with the full weight of a species behind them. And behind those ships, a Voron fleet was gathering. The galaxy held its breath. The first human boots touched the surface of the candidate world on a morning with no sunrise, because the planet did not yet have enough atmosphere to scatter light properly. The sky was black even during the day, and the ground was gray and lifeless, and the wind carried nothing but dust. Chief Engineer Tamaz Reyes stepped off the landing ramp, looked around at the emptiness and said to his crew, "Well, it is not much to look at. Let us fix that." He was 41 years old, stocky, with hands that were permanently stained with engine grease and a laugh that could be heard from 3 rooms away. He had built bridges on Mars, tunnels on Europa, and atmospheric processors on 6 different colony worlds. He was very, very good at making dead places come alive. He would need to be. The planet which the humans had temporarily named Site 7 was barely habitable. The atmosphere was mostly carbon dioxide with traces of nitrogen and sulfur. The surface temperature swung wildly between burning days and freezing nights. There was water, but it was trapped underground in ice deposits that would need to be melted and purified. There was no soil, no life, nothing. But there was potential, and humans had always been unreasonably good at seeing potential where others saw nothing. The work began immediately. Atmospheric processors were deployed first, massive machines that cracked carbon dioxide into oxygen and carbon, slowly thickening the air day by day. Water extraction rigs drilled into the ice deposits, melting and pumping billions of liters to the surface. Engineers built temporary habitats, power stations, communication networks. Scientists released engineered bacteria into the barren ground, organisms designed to break down rock into something that could eventually become soil. It was slow, it was brutal. The planet fought them at every step. Dust storms destroyed equipment. Seismic tremors collapsed tunnels. The temperature killed anyone who stayed outside their suit too long. In the first month alone, 11 people died. And still they came. For every engineer who fell, 10 more arrived on the next transport. Volunteers from every human world, miners from Titan, biologists from the Amazon Preserve, architects from Luna City, farmers from the breadbasket colonies of Kepler. They came because they wanted to. Nobody ordered them. Nobody had to. Tamaz worked 20-hour days and slept in his suit. When his second-in-command told him he was going to kill himself, he laughed and said, "Not before this planet has an ocean." 5 months into the operation, the Voron blockade arrived. 30 warships, sleek and dark, arranged themselves in a wall between the human supply lines and Site 7. Their commander broadcast a simple message on all frequencies. Any ship attempting to pass would be stopped. Force would be used if necessary. Admiral Vasquez received the message on the bridge of the UEF flagship Perseverance. She read it, set it down, and turned to her tactical officer. "How many escort ships do we have?" 47 combat-ready, Admiral. Another 60 support vessels. "And how many supply transports are waiting to go through?" 212. Vasquez nodded. Form the escorts into a protective screen around the transports. We go through. Her tactical officer hesitated. Admiral, the Voron ships are armed. If they fire. They will not fire, Vasquez said calmly. Not on supply ships carrying food, medicine, and terraforming equipment. The entire galaxy is watching. If the Vorons start a war to stop an act of compassion, they lose everything. Every alliance, every trade agreement, every ounce of respect they have built over centuries. Dreth is aggressive, but he is not stupid. She paused. And if I am wrong, then we take the hit and we keep going. We do not fire back. We do not give them a war. We give them a choice. Let us through, or explain to the galaxy why they destroyed unarmed aid ships. The convoy moved forward. 212 transports, shielded by 47 escorts, flying in a formation so tight that from a distance it looked like a single river of light flowing through the dark. The Voron fleet held position, weapons locked, targeting systems active. The lead Voron warship fired a warning shot across the bow of a human medical frigate. The blast passed close enough to rattle the hull and set off proximity alarms. On the Perseverance, every officer on the bridge tensed. Hands moved toward weapons controls. Hold, Vasquez said. Her voice did not waver. All ships hold position and maintain course. The convoy kept moving. The escorts did not flinch. The transports did not turn. They flew straight toward the Voron line at steady speed, as if the 30 warships in front of them were nothing more than clouds. The Voron commander requested orders from Counselor Dreth. Dreth stared at the tactical display and saw 212 ships filled with food and medicine and building materials, crewed by volunteers who were not carrying weapons, who were not threatening anyone, who were simply trying to build a home for a dying people. He saw the galaxy watching. He gave the order to stand down. The Voron fleet moved aside. The human convoy passed through without another shot fired. On the bridge of the Perseverance, nobody cheered. Vasquez simply said, "Resume supply operations," and went back to her chair. But across the galaxy, people were watching, and what they saw changed something. In the months that followed, other species began to join. It started small. A Relari science vessel arrived carrying atmospheric modeling data that would have taken humans years to compile. A Fenari trade convoy delivered rare minerals needed for soil engineering. A group of Selani architects, the Selani, who had voted against Hearthfire in the council, quietly offered designs for structures that could withstand the planet's seismic activity. Nobody announced these contributions. Nobody held press conferences. Ships simply arrived, unloaded, and got to work beside the humans. When asked why, a Relari captain gave an answer that spread across the galaxy within hours. "We watched the humans fly through a blockade without firing a single shot to build a home for people who are not even their own kind. What does it say about us if we just sit and watch?" On the surface, Tamaz Reyes welcomed every new arrival with the same words: "Grab a tool. We have work to do." Sira Valeth had arrived 3 months into the operation. She worked as a liaison between the human teams and the Thyran scientific community, translating not just language but understanding. She helped the human biologists design ecosystems that would feel like home to Thyran settlers. She mapped the mineral compositions that Thyran agriculture needed. She worked as hard as any human on the site, and harder than most. She also watched. She watched humans laugh after 18-hour shifts. She watched them sing songs she did not understand while repairing broken equipment in freezing temperatures. She watched them hold funerals for their dead, short, fierce ceremonies where they wept openly, and then went back to work the next morning as if grief was fuel rather than weight. She began to understand why the galaxy was afraid of this species. It was not their technology. It was not their ships. It was this impossible, irrational stubbornness. This refusal to stop. This absolute certainty that the hard thing and the right thing were the same thing, and that both were worth dying for. 2 years after the first boots touched the surface, Tamaz Ray stood on a hill overlooking a valley that had not existed when he arrived. Below him, a river ran through young grass. The sky above was pale blue, thin, imperfect, but blue. In the distance, prefabricated buildings rose in neat rows, waiting for inhabitants. The first Thyran settlers arrived the following month. They stepped off their transports and looked at a world that had been built for them by strangers who called them family. Elder Valith came with the first group. He was carried on a stretcher because his legs could no longer support him. Tamaz ordered his crew to set the stretcher down on the grass beside the river. Valith reached down with trembling fingers and touched the soil. It was dark and rich, engineered from dead rock by human hands and alien science, and 2 years of relentless, stubborn, beautiful work. He closed his eyes. Tears ran down his gray face. Sira knelt beside him and held his hand, and around them, humans and Thyrans and a dozen other species stood together on a world that should not have existed, watching an old man touch the ground of his people's future. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. 10 years after the first settlers arrived, the world they called New Ithara had a heartbeat. It was not the same as old Ithara. It never would be. The sky was a slightly different shade of blue. The oceans were younger and wilder. The forests were strange mixtures, Thyran trees with silver leaves growing beside earth oaks and alien grasses from half a dozen worlds, all tangled together in ecosystems that no one had planned but that somehow worked. It was messy, it was imperfect, it was alive. 800 million Thyrans now called this world home. The Great Migration from old Ithara had taken 6 years, carried out in waves by a fleet of human, Thyran and allied ships working together in a coordination effort that would be studied by military and civilian planners for centuries. Not a single transport was lost, not a single life wasted. Old Ithara still existed, of course. Its sun continued to expand. Its oceans were shrinking. Its temperatures climbed higher every year, but it was no longer a death sentence. It was a memory, painful, cherished, and left behind. The Thyrans mourned it, they always would, but they no longer mourned alone. Sira Valith stood at the podium of the Galactic Council chamber and looked out at the assembled representatives of 52 species. She was no longer the quiet archivist Elias Morin had met in the Great Library. 10 years of work, grief, hope, and leadership had changed her. She stood tall. Her voice was clear. Her silver eyes carried the weight of a people who had been brought back from the edge of extinction. Her grandfather had died 3 years ago on New Ithara in a small house overlooking the river valley where the first settlers had landed. He had died in his sleep, peacefully, knowing that his people would survive. Sira had been beside him. So had Elias. Now she stood where Valith had once stood, and she carried his legacy forward. "Honored members of the Council," she began. 10 years ago, humanity did something that many of you said was impossible. Some of you said it was foolish. Some of you said it was dangerous. She paused and let her gaze move across the chamber. A few representatives shifted uncomfortably. "You were right about one thing. It was dangerous. People died building our new home. Humans died. Thyrans died. Rilari and Fenari and Selani died. They died in construction accidents, in seismic events, in atmospheric failures. They died far from their own worlds, doing work that was not their responsibility, for people who were not their own." The chamber was silent. And they did it anyway, because someone decided that no civilization should die alone, that when you have the power to help, the only wrong choice is to do nothing. She placed her hands flat on the podium. That idea did not come from humanity. It came from a Thyran captain named Ilara Sen, 65 million years ago, who turned her ship to save a world she had never seen. It was carried across the ages by a species that never forgot what was done for them. And now I bring it back to this chamber, not as a Thyran idea or a human idea, but as a truth that belongs to all of us. She activated a display behind her. A simple document appeared text in 12 languages, outlining a framework that humanity and the Thyran Collective had spent 2 years drafting together. I present the Ithara Compact, an alliance open to every species in this council. Its principle is simple. No member civilization faces extinction alone. When any signatory species faces an existential threat, a dying sun, a natural disaster, a catastrophe beyond their ability to survive, the compact will respond. Together, with everything we have. Murmurs filled the chamber. Some were skeptical, some were hopeful, some were afraid. Councillor Dreth was no longer in his seat. He had been removed from power 4 years earlier, replaced by a younger Voron diplomat named Setha Ven, who had watched the Hearthfire operation with very different eyes than her predecessor. She listened to Sira's proposal with her arms folded and her expression unreadable. The debate lasted 2 days. Arguments were made for and against. Old fears were raised. Old resentments were aired. In the end, the vote was called. 44 in favor, 8 against. The Ithara Compact was ratified. Even the Voron voted yes. Admiral Renav Vasquez attended the signing ceremony. She was 63 now, gray-haired and slower than she used to be. She had announced her retirement from the United Earth Fleet 2 months earlier. And this was one of her last official acts. She stood at the edge of the crowd and watched the representatives sign the compact one by one. She did not seek attention. She did not make speeches. She simply watched. Sira found her afterward, standing alone by a window that looked out at the stars. "Admiral," Sira said, "I wanted to thank you personally." Vasquez turned to her. She looked tired but content, the way a person looks when they have carried something heavy for a very long time and have finally been allowed to set it down. "You do not need to thank me," Vasquez said. "Yes, I do. You changed everything. You must know that." Vasquez shook her head slowly. "No, a Thyran captain changed everything 65 million years ago. She turned her ship because she believed that life deserved a chance. Everything that followed, all of it started with her. We just returned the favor." Sira was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was court-martialed for what she did. They erased her name. They called her a criminal. "I know," Vasquez said softly. "She deserves better." "Yes," Vasquez agreed, "she does." 6 months later, on a hill outside the capital city of New Ithara, a memorial was built. It was simple. 2 stones set side by side on a raised platform. One was from old Ithara, dark volcanic rock pulled from the mountains of the Thyran homeworld before the last transports departed. The other was from earth, pale granite, shipped across the stars from a quarry in a place called Vermont. Beneath the 2 stones, an inscription was carved in both Thyran script and English. It read, "She turned her ship because she believed all life deserved a chance. We turned our ships because we believed the same. In memory of Captain Alara Sen of the Thyran Collective, and all those who followed her example across 65 million years." The dedication ceremony was attended by thousands. Thyran families stood beside human engineers who had helped build their world. Relari scientists stood beside Fenari traders. Children of a dozen species played together on the grass while their parents looked at 2 stones and thought about what they meant. Elias Morin attended the ceremony alone. He stood at the back of the crowd and watched and listened and felt the warm breeze on his face. New Ithara's wind smelled like growing things now, grass and flowers, and the faint salt of a young ocean. After the speeches were over and the crowd began to thin, he walked to the memorial and stood in front of it for a long time. He thought about Alara Sen, alone in her quarters aboard the Vithari, writing her final log before her trial. He thought about her words, "Every living thing deserves a chance." He thought about Valith, old and frail, casting his vote in a chamber full of beings who had given up on hope. He thought about Vasquez, standing on the bridge of her ship, ordering her fleet to hold fire while the Voron pointed guns at them. He thought about Tomás Reyes, covered in dust and grease, laughing in the dark of an alien world and saying, "It is not much to look at. Let us fix that." He thought about Sira, holding her grandfather's hand, while he touched the soil of a world built by the stubbornness and love of a species that did not know how to forget a kindness. Behind him, he heard children laughing. He turned and saw them running through the fields, Thyran children, blue-skinned and silver-eyed, chasing each other through grass that had been grown in engineered soil on a world that had been dead rock a decade ago. They were laughing the way all children laugh, in every species, on every world, loud and free, and completely unaware of how miraculous their existence was. Elias watched them and smiled. 65 million years ago, a captain turned her ship to save a world she would never know. And 65 million years later, the children of that world turned their ships to return the favor. It had taken the universe a very long time to close the circle, but it had closed it beautifully. Elias looked at the memorial one last time, at the two stones leaning against each other like old friends, and he thought the only thought that mattered. Kindness is never wasted. It just takes the universe a while to pay it back. He turned and walked down the hill toward the sound of children laughing, and the sun, a new sun, a good sun, one that would burn steady for billions of years, shone warm and golden on the world that love had built.